So right now, inside Trump's political circle, there is a fight happening that is getting uglier by the day. Because the person Donald Trump just fired is now trying to take someone else down with her. And that someone is one of the most powerful figures inside Trump's entire administration, Stephen Miller. For years, Miller has been one of Trump's closest advisors, the architect of the administration's immigration agenda. The man many insiders say actually controls large parts of the policy machine behind the scenes. But now, something has changed. Because after Kristi Noem was pushed out, she didn't quietly disappear. Instead, she started leaking. And according to people inside Washington, what she's trying to do now is simple. She wants Stephen Miller fired next. And the really shocking part? Some Republicans are now publicly saying the exact same thing. If you've been watching the Trump administration closely, you've probably noticed something. The biggest battles right now aren't happening between Republicans and Democrats. They're happening inside the MAGA movement itself. Different factions fighting for influence. Different advisors trying to control Trump's decisions. And that internal conflict is becoming more obvious every week. Because when Kristi Noem was removed from her position, the official explanation focused on several controversies surrounding her leadership. But behind the scenes, insiders say something else was happening, a power struggle, specifically between Noem and Stephen Miller. And in that fight, Miller appears to have won the first round. But if Noem has her way, that victory may not last very long.
But what you're seeing right now, Sean, is a military under President Trump's leadership that's not fighting politically correct, that isn't fighting with its hands tied behind its back. One of the reasons I fear, Sean, that some people in this country lost faith in the military and the capacity to use that military to defend us is because we had a woke Pentagon. Because we had a military who at the very highest levels, not the warfighters, was forced to fight a less than full fight.
Shortly after Noem's firing, reports started appearing suggesting she was telling people inside Washington that the real problem wasn't her, it was Stephen Miller. According to those accounts, Noem claimed many of the most controversial decisions tied to immigration policy actually came from Miller. In other words, she was trying to shift the blame. And that kind of accusation inside a political administration is explosive, because it doesn't just create a scandal, it creates a power struggle. And suddenly, Miller found himself doing something unusual, defending himself publicly. For years, Stephen Miller has operated mostly behind the scenes. You'd see him on television occasionally, but most of his influence came from working inside the White House, shaping policy, writing speeches, designing immigration strategy. But now, the spotlight is suddenly turning toward him. And that's partly because the immigration agenda he helped design has become one of the most controversial issues in the administration. Critics argue that the deportation strategy pushed by Miller has created legal and political chaos. And because of that, some Republicans are starting to worry about the political fallout. Which brings us to the moment that really changed the conversation. Because a Republican senator just publicly said something that nobody expected to hear.
You think Stephen Miller should go?
Oh, of course I do. I think Stephen Miller is one of the. Not only does Stephen really want to just paint a picture, he's not worried about substance, he's more worried about form, but I also think that he has an outsized influence over the operations of the cabinet. And I believe we've got qualified cabinet members there that sometimes are doing less than what they want to because of his direction and his outsized influence. He's a big problem in this administration. He has been from the beginning. But Noem is a Senate-confirmed cabinet member. She should have been independent. I believe that Mark Wayne will be independent. I believe that Mark Wayne will be driven by data. He'll leverage law enforcement resources, expertise, people like Tom Holman to get things right. And if he doesn't, we'd hold him accountable. But I have a lot of confidence in my friend, and I'm looking forward to him getting this department under control so that Republicans can seize an issue that helped us get elected, strong on the border, strong on deportation, strong on the rule of law.
That statement is a huge deal. Because Tom Tillis isn't some random commentator. He's a sitting Republican senator. And when a senator publicly calls for a senior White House advisor to be fired, that sends a message. Tillis didn't hold back either. He argued that Miller has too much influence over the administration, that cabinet members may be following his direction even when they disagree, and that his role has become a problem inside the government. Now think about that for a second, because Stephen Miller is not even a cabinet member. Yet according to critics inside Washington, his influence may be stronger than many of the people who actually run departments. And that's exactly why Kristi Noem's accusations suddenly matter so much. After being removed from her position, Noem began telling reporters that she had serious problems with how the White House handled certain policies. She claimed she wasn't getting the support she needed. But inside the administration, other officials quickly pushed back on that claim. They argued that the controversies surrounding her leadership were the result of her own decisions, not a lack of support. Which means two different versions of the same story are now circulating, and both sides are leaking information to the media. That's usually a sign that a political fight is escalating. Part of the conflict between Noem and Miller revolves around one specific issue: immigration enforcement. Several incidents involving immigration operations became national news after controversial statements were made by officials. In one situation, individuals were labeled domestic terrorists before the investigation had even been completed. That created a backlash. Critics argued the administration had rushed to conclusions. And according to Senator Tillis, Stephen Miller may have been involved in pushing those narratives.
One of your points of contention with Secretary Noem was her handling of the aftermath of those fatal ICE shootings of 2 American citizens, specifically how she jumped to conclusions before their deaths had been investigated, calling them domestic terrorists. I do want to play for you how Senator Mullen reacted just hours after Alex Preddy was shot and killed.
A deranged individual that came in to cause max damage with a loaded pistol with an extra mag that was completely loaded, was shot and killed. How much more does this got to go on before the Democrat leaders there take responsibility for their words?
So obviously there's no evidence that Alex Preddy was deranged or that he came to cause maximum damage with a loaded pistol. He had a license to carry, or that any Democratic leader was responsible for this tragedy. Does that give you any pause?
It gives me pause that you had people like Stephen Miller calling the shots that actually I believe that maybe Kristi Noem acted on. It was Stephen Miller that was talking about a terrorist brandishing a gun. It was Stephen Miller who said it was the position of the United States that we should go after Greenland. It's Stephen Miller that's been repeatedly responsible for embarrassments for the President of the United States by acting too quickly, speaking first and thinking later. I don't think Mark Wayne goes to the podium and repeats something that Stephen Miller says. I think Stephen Miller's demonstrated he too is out of his depth, and I think Mark Wayne will learn from that.
Now here's the bigger political question. What does all of this mean for Donald Trump? Because if you look at the pattern, something becomes obvious. Many of the people around Trump are fighting each other for influence. Different advisors, different political factions, different strategies. And when those internal conflicts become public, they start to weaken the entire administration, especially when accusations and leaks start flying. That's exactly what appears to be happening now. Noem is blaming Miller. Miller's allies are blaming Noem. And some Republicans are now questioning Miller's role altogether. At the center of all of this is one simple reality. Donald Trump often relies heavily on advisors, and that means whoever has the most influence around him can shape major decisions. For years, many insiders believe Stephen Miller held that position, but now other figures inside the Republican Party are challenging that influence. And if the pressure continues building, Trump may eventually face a difficult choice: stand by Miller or remove him to calm the political storm. For now, the battle inside Trump's political circle is still unfolding. Kristi Noem is trying to defend her reputation after being fired. Stephen Miller is trying to hold on to his influence inside the administration. And Republicans like Thom Tillis are openly questioning whether Miller should remain in his role. In other words, the internal fight inside MAGA world is far from over. And if the leaks and accusations keep escalating the way they are right now, this story may end with another major shakeup inside Trump's inner circle. Because in Washington, power struggles rarely stay quiet for long. Eventually someone wins, someone loses, and right now, it looks like Stephen Miller might be the next person whose position is on the line.